Hello there. This is Sean Parker for Empowering the Innocent and False Allegations Watch. And today we're talking to Sandra Lean, Dr. Sandra Lean, who for years now has been probably Mr. Luke Mitchell's biggest supporter in the community. She knows everything about his case. Luke was sentenced to murder in 2005 for the incident that happened in 2003. Sandra knows much more about this, and I'm going to try to get to the heart of it on a very special day. Hi, Sandra. Do you want to tell us about the special day?
Hi, Sean. Yeah, thanks for having me. 20 years ago today, two 14-year-olds essentially lost their lives, one to murder, the other to a life sentence. And many, many more people, myself included, had their lives changed by that event 20 years ago today.
Yeah, thank you. You say that you also had your life changed. Do you want to quickly go into that before we go into him?
Yeah, I had nothing to do with wrongful convictions, the law, anything like that. I knew nothing about it. But this murder happened 500 metres from the school my eldest daughter attended. We're just a collection of little villages. Nothing ever really happens here. And suddenly this 14-year-old girl was murdered. And it was terrifying. But what terrified me more living in the community was how quickly they decided her 14-year-old boyfriend was the killer. And it seemed to me that they made that decision on the basis of nothing at all. That worried me, because if that was true and it wasn't him, then the real person was still in our community, where my two daughters were going about their day-to-day lives. And that's how it changed my life. That's how I got involved. And here I am 20 years later, still trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, and you're doing a fantastic job, by the way, for us who watch. So what happened that day according to the justice system?
According to the justice system, Jodie Jones was 14 years old. She'd been grounded. Her grounding was lifted round about 4:30 that afternoon. She was going to go and meet her boyfriend, Luke. So there's two villages just over a mile apart. Jodie lives at one end, Luke at the other, and there's a path, a country path that joins the two of them. Jodie didn't turn up. Her mum contacted Luke because Jodie's phone was broken, 20 to 11 that night, to say, right, up the road, you're in serious trouble. That's when they found out she hadn't been seen since sometime after 5 o'clock. Some people went out to search for her, Luke being one of them, Luke Mitchell, the boyfriend. And Jodie's body was found just around 25 to midnight on the 30th of June. She'd been horribly murdered, absolutely brutally murdered. And so I say 25 to midnight, from 10 to midnight, 5 to midnight, the police on the scene, on the ground, already believed that 14-year-old Luke was the killer. That became the story right to the end, right to this day.
Yeah.
And when you see how they pieced this ridiculous story together, it beggars belief that they got a charge, far less a conviction, but they did.
Right. So Luke is a prisoner maintaining innocence, and he's there. He's kind of alive in prison and doing his thing. Why does he say he's innocent, and why do you believe him?
There's no evidence, physical or forensic, to connect Luke to the murder scene, to Jodie, or vice versa, Jodie to him. There was no forensic evidence found on the body at the crime scene of Luke's, but there is forensic evidence, DNA evidence, of other males. Some of them were handed innocent explanations: washing machine transfer, rainwater transfer. But what we know now is that none of them were ever investigated as persons of interest. ever. When you look at the case files, there are so many things that the police should have followed up on and didn't. And you'll have seen in the documentaries and various things over the years, everybody comes back to the same conclusion. They focused on Luke Mitchell to the exclusion of everyone and everything else. And when you start to unpackage that, what you get is a terrifying picture of all of this evidence and all of these different bits and pieces that should have had the police going, whoa, let's follow this line, because we've got evidence, we've got lies, we've got missing phones, we've got people who said they were one place, we were actually somewhere else. Let's follow that and see where that takes us. Didn't even look at it. So why do I believe he's innocent? Two things really. There is no evidence, and you hear people saying no credible evidence. Yeah, in this case, no evidence, none. Nothing that links him to the murder. And the flip side of that is all of the evidence that we now know about that points in the opposite direction to Luke. And now I'm not saying that any of these other people who should have been persons of interest are the killer. What I'm saying is, just as they could not possibly claim that they were sure that Luke was a killer, we cannot now say that we can be sure that none of these people were involved, because there's so much evidence that points towards them.
Yeah. And I guess that in Scotland, it's the principle of the beyond reasonable doubt, as it's supposed to be in England, right? We're not that different. And the Enlightenment started in Scotland, for heaven's sake. I presume that this is very much not beyond reasonable doubt, is it? At least, is that correct?
It's not beyond a smidgen of doubt, far less reasonable doubt. On terms of legal principles, we also have the presumption of innocence. You take a 14-year-old kid and put his picture in the paper and name him and give his home address and call him a murderer and the devil's spawn, and do that for 19 months, day after day after day, before any trial has begun. There's no presumption of innocence, and the case is not proven beyond reasonable doubt. Where does that leave us in the land of the beginning of the Enlightenment?
Right. I can remember 2003, I was 28, and a big fuss about Luke, of course, in the papers. I wasn't as into justice reform back then as I am now, and but I can remember thinking, wow, media. But I didn't even think, is this not him? Because you don't to the telly, do you? You don't think, is this not him? You think, well, it must be him because the police are so on him.
My thoughts from the beginning.
In the article for CCRC Watch that you wrote a couple of months ago, it's a very good article, we'll do a link to it. You said that it was an 8-month witch hunt, essentially, or kind of words to that effect. Was it kind of one of the first trial by media and then have him put away situations, do you think? Is that a fair way of putting it?
I have no doubt that it was absolutely trial by media. The jury were taken from the local community. We are 8 miles from Edinburgh, and the trial was held in Edinburgh. The jury was pulled from the local community, many of whom commute to Edinburgh for work. People talked about nothing else in this area for the year and a half up to the trial. The place was jumping with rumour, and everybody knew somebody that knew somebody's brother that knew a police officer, that you know, the sort of thing. And that boy was convicted before he put a step into a courtroom.
Yeah.
And the jurors had already been fed. We're finding now, people are saying, yeah, but his mum burned his parka jacket, and people go, no, she didn't. There is no evidence. And in the last 2 years in particular, people are so angry that they were fed all of that by the media, and they believed it. It was so convincing.
Yeah.
And now they're beginning to see the other side and question, how did they get away with telling us all that? And none of it was true.
Mm-hmm.
None of it. Prior to the trial.
Yeah. So what I'm going to go into it a little bit here. What is the stance now of Roadies family in general? Do you have any steer on that you can tell us?
Jodie's family are utterly 100% convinced that Luke is the killer. I believe that was the work of the police, not just at the time. And we know the police lied to them at the time to convince them it was Luke, but the police have remained involved with this family. So in 2009, from memory, after a series of emails, Jodie's mum agreed to meet me because I had the DNA results and I wanted to show her. They'd been told there were strands of Luke's DNA all over Jodie's body. There are none. And I wanted to show her the DNA results and explain them to her and to say to her, this here is what they're telling you are strands of his DNA, and here's why they're not. And she did initially agree to meet with me. And then she emailed me and said she'd spoken to the police and they told her not to speak to me.
Right.
So that is 6 or 7 years after the murder.
2010-ish.
The police were still telling them, don't listen to it, it's all rubbish.
Right. Well, I suppose they can say, are they allowed to do that? But it's kind of post-trial, isn't it? So I suppose people can do whatever they want. And
yeah,
understood though. I can understand the stance on that, as I'm sure everyone watching. But what is his kind of right? But what is Luke's appeal situation at the moment? CCRC appeal, that sort of thing. And if you could tell the viewers what that actually means, by the way.
Okay, so he appealed the conviction itself in 2008, and that appeal failed. We had, something like 10 grounds of appeal, and they just knocked them all out, one after the other. The star witness, who was supposed to be an eyewitness, who identified Luke and Jodie, our identifications were nothing like them at the appeal. This was all pointed out, and the appeal judges said, but the jury was entitled to infer that it may have been Jodie, and upheld. It turned down that ground of appeal.
Wow.
So they agree. It was nothing like Jodie. The description was nothing like her. The time was wrong, everything. But if the jury wanted to infer that it was her, well, what can we do about it now? So that was the approach the appeal court took. We then had to, we did try a Supreme Court appeal on the basis of a conviction that was overturned in 2011. The Supreme Court judged on it in 2011. And that was on this thing that they did in Scotland, right up until then, called a Section 14 interview, where they can take anybody, including children, into a room with 2 or 3 seasoned detectives with no access to legal advice or representation. This boy was a child. He had just turned 15. 3 of them, good cop, bad cop, one in, one out, for 6.5 hours. And they used the Reed technique on him. No lawyer, nobody to support him. And that was legal in Scotland up till 2011. Then the Supreme Court said, you have to stop doing that. You can't, you're breaching the human rights. You cannot do that. And so that opened a window for people who had been convicted on the basis of these interviews to appeal. But the Scottish judges said only if there's active proceedings. So Luke had had his first appeal, but what they hadn't done was decided on the sentence appeal that had gone in at the same time. So now we were in a race against time. We had to get to the Supreme Court while there were still active proceedings. And the Scottish court came back something like 2 days before we got to the Supreme Court and decided the sentence appeal. And that was it. There were no live proceedings, so we couldn't go to the Supreme Court either.
Right.
Finally, we went to the SCCRC, the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, who are supposed to review the case and identify whether there's a a possibility on the basis of their review that the jury might have come to a different conclusion had they known these bits and pieces. So we laid the whole thing out for them. And they came back. This was 2014. They came back and they said, yes, his rights were breached here, 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 and here. Yes, evidence was withheld from the defence. Yes, another suspect, person who should have been a suspect, was identified, and that wasn't released to the defence either. So it goes, you know, we've got this list of things that the commission go, oh, they shouldn't have done that and they shouldn't have done that. Now, to let people understand, Luke's case was a circumstantial case. So they took all these little nuggets that meant nothing on their own. And the judges said that, the appeal judges said that. They don't have to mean anything in particular on their own. But what they do is they stitch them together to create a narrative. And that gives it the weight once they're all connected together. We go to the commission and they find a fault here and a fault here and a fault here and a fault here. And we're thinking, they'll do with that exactly what they did with the case against them. They'll stitch it all together and they'll say, well, one in its own right might not mean a miscarriage of justice, but when you take them all together, it does.
Mm-hmm.
No, they said, yes, they breached his rights, but that on its own doesn't make it a miscarriage of justice. Yes, they failed to disclose evidence to the defence, but that doesn't make it a miscarriage of justice. Yes, somebody else was identified, but that doesn't, individually, rather than adding them all together. That was 2014, and it seemed like unless we could turn up new evidence that meets the definition, the legal definition of new evidence, that which was not or could not reasonably have been known at the time of the trial, we were done. We had nowhere else to go. And then in 2021, the Channel 5 documentary, two-part documentary, Murder in a Small Town, brought attention to the case, massive attention to the case. I didn't see that coming. I was not expecting it, but huge. And people started coming forward and telling us, we went to the police. There was this person here. We described that person to the police. They didn't come back and take our statements. They took our name and never came back. This guy who told the police he was here at that time, we saw him somewhere else. We told the police and they told us it didn't matter. So now we've got all these people coming forward. We've had scientists get on board, forensic scientists getting on board going, where's the results for that? Why has that never been tested? And suddenly the window for new evidence has been thrown wide open because we've exposed everything.
Wow. So what's the situation now?
You see, that sounded really promising, didn't it? At the end of last year, we got a heads up from a whistleblower that Police Scotland, because we only have one police force in Scotland now, we used to have all different, but they're all just the one police force now, had started destroying the evidence in this case. They knew we were going to go for another appeal or another application to the commission. And it turned out it was absolutely true. More than 90% of the evidence in this case was destroyed. Nearly 4 years earlier than it should have been. And more than half, 3/4 actually, of what was destroyed unlawfully. No permission to destroy it. So we've been chasing this back and forward, trying to, it's like herding cats, trying to pin down who's responsible for each bit of the process. But the good news was we had round about 300 samples from the forensic evidence that had been preserved. They hadn't been destroyed yet. Yes,
right.
We're on again. And then I found out last week, so we made Police Scotland give an undertaking that they would not do anything with these samples. We wanted them for testing and they were not to destroy them. They were not to do anything to them. And they came back and said, right, okay, because we caught them red-handed. What else could they say? Yeah, right, okay, we'll look after them for you. Found out last week, Police Scotland have handed them over to another organisation, the Scottish Police Authority, which is not Police Scotland. So we have no undertaking with them to preserve the samples.
So they're passing it off to...
Yeah, our concern now, because it's gone to a forensic lab in the Scottish Police Authority, our concern is that they will test them in their own labs, and then there'll be nothing left, or not enough left, for our scientists to carry out a test for us. Yeah.
So the information that you gleaned off the other appeals, where the CCRC said correct, that the fact that they went into it and they agreed with you, the other side agreed with you, doesn't that stand to a future appeal? So kind of, even if they got rid of all the evidence, it wouldn't matter, because it stands that it has been tested and they have agreed. Doesn't that work?
The SCCRC didn't agree on the forensic testing because the original case was never founded on forensic evidence. We know now why. Because they had done. They could never have won their case. Right. So that's a little bit of a glitch there, is that it's not something that the Commission have agreed with a lot, but not in relation to the forensics. And then the latest thing, to bring the whole case right up to date, Luke was spirited out to lower category conditions after the documentary. Very quietly, just off he went down to lower category conditions, and we're like, didn't see that one coming. It was a trick. It was to make it look like something was being done. But once they got him there, they just refused to allow him to go through all the processes that he should have gone in a lower category prison to work towards parole, to work towards release. And basically for 2 years, they psychologically tortured him. And a few weeks ago, we'd been talking about this for a while on the phone, and he said, look, Sandra, I want the world to know what they're doing to me here. Because the silence is protecting them, it's not protecting me. And I was like, right, now, you know what the consequences could be here. We talked at length about it. And he said, no, I have to do it. If it means I go back to, excuse me, top security, then so be it. But I need to get this out there. People need to know. So we did a series of interviews, which I put out on YouTube, called it The Sound of Silence. And the following, so that was, I put them out on the Sunday. And by the Wednesday, they pounced on him. They were sending him back to closed conditions, accused him of unlawful use of prison communication devices.
Unlawful?
When it's actually unlawful, yeah. Perfectly legal what he did, perfectly legal what I did. Speaking as a prisoner maintaining innocence, speaking to, I'm not media personnel, but, you know, knowing that it was going to go into the media is his right. And I sent the prison the various cases where the courts have found in favour of the prisoner, time after time after time. The prison officer told Luke, I don't care what the law says. And then spit him out overnight, took away all his phone contact, all these video calls, everything. He was 5 days without contact with his lawyer. So go right back to the Section 14 interviews in 2003. No legal advice or representation. 20 years later, almost to the day, they do the same thing.
So essentially, he was being punished for talking to you and sort of saying, I want the world to know. They're saying, no, you're not, even though you're in a lower category prison. This is a free speech issue now, surely. That part of it's a free... Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Would you like to get some other people involved in that? Would he like other people to get involved in that side of thing? Good.
Absolutely. We are now
my interest.
Where whatever help, whatever expertise people can offer, we will accept with open arms, because until now there's really only been myself and Scott Forbes, who trained as a lawyer. He actually worked on Luke's case during his traineeship as a lawyer. that have been able to do anything. It's a big case for two people, and so many areas of law and rights to go into. Yeah, so we would be so grateful for.
Yeah, he's kind of for maintaining innocence for reasons that you've just been eloquent in describing, and as far as I'm concerned, as far as empowering the innocent is concerned, not me, you know, False Allegations Watch, which is mine, it's like that makes his kind of right to communicate almost equal to a person. Yeah, just because he's been convicted, well, we have seen that he's not been convicted beyond reasonable doubt. Thus, he has the rights of a citizen to communicate. I mean, I think that's a very justifiable. Personally, I think that's a very justifiable place, and obviously, it's to be fought in a court, but it shouldn't be done by a prison governor saying, "I don't care what the law says." That's, of course,
Yeah.
of interest in in the home of the Enlightenment there in Scotland.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
We completely hear you. So okay. Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to put at the end of this to extras, or is that pretty much the story and the place that we're at now?
That's pretty much the story. It's pretty much the place we're at. It's the thing that I always say for anybody that's maybe new to this or gets the idea that it only happens to a certain type of person or it only happens in certain circumstances. Any one of us. And every time one of these cases gets stuck like this and we can't get the conviction overturned and we can't shine a light on what the system does to make this happen, we leave open the possibility that the next person could be somebody listening to this right now who's no idea that it could happen to them. And that's one of the reasons I do what I do, to try and educate people. Yes, it's not just a one-off. It's not just something that, you know, certain people in certain circumstances or certain families. No, it could be the guy next door tomorrow. And people really need to know that.
Yeah. So we don't know who killed Jodie, but we do know to the sense of 99% or to 100 that it wasn't Luke.
Yes.
Yeah. And now he's been spirited off just for trying to talk about it.
Yeah.
And because he said he's had enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. On his 20th, not his, on the 20th anniversary of poor Jodie's death. And of course, so we remember that with a bit of silence, and that's what it's all about, of course, isn't it? So there's that anniversary, and all very prescient to have it on this day.
Yes, and people need to remember 20 years and Jodie's never had justice either.
Well, that's exactly, it's the tragedy at the heart of the whole thing. And let's not forget 25,000 signatures on that petition of yours, aren't there? There's a lot of public support out there.
Over 28,000 now.
28,000. So, I mean, that says so much. Okay. So thank you so much for talking to us. Very eloquently put, brilliant. And hopefully, perhaps we'll do another one later in the year for Empowering the Innocent with some different news. Who knows? Is that an idea, maybe?
Yeah, that would be excellent.
Yeah,
thank you so much for asking me to speak.
Thank you, Sandra. Good night.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.